In episode 31, titled Address Multi-Tenant Isolation Controls, we focus on one of the defining challenges of shared computing environments, ensuring that customers share infrastructure but never share data or privileges. Multi-tenancy underpins cloud efficiency, but without clear isolation boundaries, it becomes a structural risk instead of a business advantage. The central principle is simple yet unforgiving. Resources may be shared, but trust domains must remain separate at every layer. When identity, network, storage, and encryption boundaries align and are tested regularly, multi-tenant systems achieve the same security posture as fully isolated ones while retaining scalability and cost benefits. To begin, define multi-tenancy precisely so that design and policy stay anchored to reality. A multi-tenant environment is one in which multiple customers, projects, or business units consume the same physical or virtual infrastructure, but each operates within a logically distinct boundary that prevents data or control leakage. Tenants share compute nodes, network fabrics, storage backplanes, and management APIs, yet the system enforces strict access separation. This definition must live in architecture diagrams, authorization packages, and agreements so everyone, operators, assessors, and customers, understands where sharing stops and isolation begins. Without that clarity, gaps appear when assumptions differ across teams or products. Identity segmentation is the first structural barrier and one of the most powerful. Each tenant should have unique roles, policies, and authorization boundaries that prevent actions or visibility across tenants. This means separate identity namespaces or domains, distinct role-based access control (RBAC) policies, and scoping mechanisms that bind permissions to a single tenant context. Administrative tools should never default to global listings of resources without explicit tenant filters. Service accounts or automation agents must operate under tenant-scoped credentials, not shared superuser tokens. When access control policies, identity stores, and audit logs all encode tenant identifiers explicitly, privilege escalation across boundaries becomes measurably harder and auditable when attempted. Network segmentation is the next layer of defense, transforming logical identity separation into physical or virtual containment. Routes, subnets, security groups, and firewall rules should enforce per-tenant communication boundaries so that traffic never crosses lines unless mediated by approved service endpoints. Software-defined networking makes this practical. Use tenant tags or virtual private network segments to isolate flows, enforce default deny at shared gateways, and log any exception routes for review. Control plane networks deserve the same rigor as data planes. Administrative channels must not traverse tenant networks. The goal is predictable containment. Even if a host misbehaves, its packets die within the correct fence. Storage isolation complements network segmentation by ensuring that data belonging to one tenant cannot be accessed, queried, or inferred by another. Logical partitioning, using tenant identifiers in schemas, namespaces, or storage accounts, combined with explicit access control lists, enforces this divide. Access policies should filter every read and write operation by tenant context, validated both at application and data service layers. Multi-tenant storage systems must also defend against metadata leakage, where resource names or object counts could reveal another tenant's footprint. Strong role enforcement, access path validation, and permission scoping make sure every request carries the correct tenant tag and nothing else. Encryption adds another layer of defense by giving each tenant its own cryptographic boundary. Encrypt data per tenant using distinct keys, separate encryption contexts, and independent rotation schedules. Key material should be generated and stored within a managed key management service, KMS, or hardware security module, HSM, that supports tenant-level segmentation. Separation of duties ensures that no single operator can retrieve multiple tenants' keys or use one key outside its assigned context. When each tenant's dataset depends on a unique key, even a storage layer compromise yields unreadable ciphertext for other customers, turning what could be a catastrophic failure into a contained event. Tokens and session credentials require careful scoping so that authentication and authorization assertions cannot leak across tenants. Token confusion attacks exploit poorly defined scopes, audience fields, or issuer validations. Every token should explicitly identify its tenant, its permitted resources, and its time to live, and systems must validate those claims before honoring the request. Never reuse access tokens between tenants and prevent APIs from accepting tokens issued for another context even when attributes overlap. Logging must record token issuers and tenant identifiers so investigators can trace cross-tenant attempts. These safeguards ensure that authentication remains tied to the right boundary throughout its lifetime. Shared caching mechanisms, if not properly partitioned, become silent bridges between tenants. In-memory caches, content delivery networks, and application accelerators should use tenant-aware namespaces, partition keys, or container isolation to keep data distinct. Without partitioning, one tenant's data fragments or session objects can be returned to another, leading to exposure without direct access. Eviction policies must also guard against key reuse and stale content leaks. Where true isolation is impossible, use dedicated caches per tenant or apply strong encryption and signing so that data exposure yields nothing usable. Shared performance tools must never undermine data boundaries. Administrative reach presents another subtle risk. An overly broad operator account or automation script can cross every tenant boundary in one keystroke. Limit administrative blast radius by defining break-glass roles that require explicit approvals, dual authorization, and time-bound access for cross-tenant maintenance. Privileged actions should be logged in immutable audit trails and reviewed frequently. Segregate support operations so that day-to-day maintenance occurs within tenant-specific contexts and global accounts are reserved for emergencies. When operators must cross boundaries, the system should make that movement obvious and deliberate, not casual. Testing cross-tenant boundaries with targeted penetration vectors is essential to prove that isolation works under stress. Simulate attempts to access data or services between tenants, inject crafted requests, and verify that failures occur cleanly with no leakage of identifiers, metadata, or timing artifacts. Red teams or external testers should vary methods across application, network, and storage layers to expose subtle design flaws. These exercises should be scheduled regularly and after major architectural changes. Document the scope, methods, and results in the assessment package to demonstrate active validation rather than assumed confidence. Monitoring reinforces isolation by detecting anomalies that no test can anticipate. Collect and review pertinent logs, including access requests, authentication results, and network flow summaries. Alerts should trigger when patterns appear inconsistent with expected tenant behavior, such as one tenant generating traffic to another's subnet or access logs containing foreign tenant identifiers. Monitoring tools themselves must respect isolation, using role-based access control to prevent analysts from inadvertently viewing unrelated tenant data. By linking alerts to tenant identifiers and risk levels, you build a continuous feedback loop between operations and assurance. Documentation ties all this work together by recording inheritance from platform-level isolation controls and the responsibilities each party holds. Many controls in a multi-tenant system are shared or inherited from the underlying cloud provider, such as physical segregation or hypervisor hardening. The System Security Plan, SSP, and Control Summary Table should identify which isolation safeguards the platform guarantees and which the organization must implement. Contracts or memoranda of understanding formalize this split so assessors can verify accountability. Clear documentation prevents confusion later when evidence requests span both provider and customer domains. A simple memory hook captures the essence of the program: separate identities, networks, storage, keys, and tokens. If those 5 domains are independently enforced, monitored, and tested, tenant boundaries hold under most conditions. Each word in the sequence represents a control family, and together they describe the architecture of trust in shared infrastructure. Repeat this line during design reviews and audits to ensure that no new feature skips one of the pillars. In closing, tenant isolation is achieved not by slogans, but by design, evidence, and constant verification. When identities, networks, storage, encryption, and tokens stay segmented, when administrative reach is minimized, when cross-tenant testing and monitoring are routine, and when inheritance is documented clearly, shared infrastructure can meet the same assurance bar as dedicated environments. The next action is concrete. Document the tenant separation guarantees in the system security plan and share them for review with both provider and assessor teams. That single artifact turns invisible architecture into visible trust, and that is the hallmark of sound multi-tenant security. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.